We're looking at chapter 5, verse 2 of Ephesians this morning. We started this chapter yesterday where it says, "Therefore be imitators of God and as beloved children." So we want to be imitators of God. And then he begins to talk about what we could call the love walk. The word walk is used quite often in the book of Ephesians. Remember back in chapter 2, verse 10, was the very first time I believe he used that particular word. And he says that we should walk in the works that the Lord has prepared for us, the good works that he's prepared for us. So then in chapter 4, verse 1, when he begins to talk there about our walk in a worthy manner. And now he moves on to talk about our love walk, our walk in love as imitators of God. As we look at that, he speaks of Christ here, and he speaks of Christ's love. So we're imitating the love of Christ. And Christ's love is framed around two relationships. So as we think about imitating his love, we think about these two relationships in which Christ demonstrated love. One was for us, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us. And so we find this ultimate test of love, giving of ourselves for another, of dying for another, even as Christ did. Remember, Jesus talked about this himself, that in what we call the Great Commandment in John chapter 13, and where he said there that I give you a new commandment, a new commandment that you're to love one another as I have loved you and have given myself for you. That's what he's talking about here. And so this ultimate act of love of giving ourselves to another or for another so that they can be helped and loved in a way that we demonstrated in an unselfish way concerning them. That's how Christ loved us, and that's how he would have us love one another. In chapter 5, verse 25, he uses this same idea when he talks about husbands who are to love their wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. So again, Christ gave himself for the church. Husbands are to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for the church. And we are to love one another as Christ has given himself for us. So that's the relationship with us, between people. There's another relationship, though, here that demonstrates the love of Christ, and that is his relationship with the Father. He goes on to say, as an offering and a sacrifice to God is a fragrant aroma. This is a piece of the redemption process we often miss out on and forget about. Yes, Christ died for us. He died in our place. He died so that we can be forgiven. Had he not done that, we could not be saved. But often we don't think about what he had to do in relationship to the Father. And it says here that he is an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. The doctrinal term here is a big one, is propitiation. It's the idea that the righteous wrath, the righteous justice of God has to be satisfied for us to be saved. Otherwise, a holy and perfect and righteous God could not receive us to himself. How can a holy God take to himself sinful people without somebody paying the price for our sin? He simply cannot wink at sin. He simply cannot say, oh, well, you're forgiven. Come on in and join me in heaven. Something has to be done to satisfy his judgment. And that something is going to be either our personal spiritual death, or it's going to be something Christ has done for us. Remember in Romans chapter 6 and verse 23, it says, for the wages of sin is death. And so what happens as a result of our sinfulness, because we cannot go into the presence of a holy God as sinners, is that we will die, not only physically, but spiritually. But it says here that Christ died for us. He, as an offering and a sacrifice to God, so that he paid the penalty, he paid the price of our sin to satisfy the righteous judgment of God. And it says here this is a fragrant aroma. So that tells us this is something that pleases God. Christ's death for us is not only for our benefit, but for the benefit of the Father, for the benefit of God. And that sacrifice on our behalf, that sacrifice given to the Father, is a fragrant aroma. It is a pleasing sacrifice to God. It satisfies God's requirements for our salvation. That is the perfect example of love, and it is an example that we are called to imitate. We'll never get there, but it's always our desire to imitate that kind of love. You have a wonderful day in the Lord as you contemplate this truth.